And welcome to Straight Up with Marc Patrone. Appreciate you tuning in, my friends. Well, it's budget day in Canada. The Carney government is about to unveil its long-awaited first budget. Prime Minister Carney has promised to spend big on capital projects with an aim towards spurring economic growth. A key spending commitment, as leaked to the Globe and Mail, a $50 billion local infrastructure fund. And that will include money for things like hospitals and transportation and housing. There will have to be money allocated to the healthcare sector, including emergency services. Also, big spending in military upgrades. The budget will also announce plans to retire aging military fleets to make way for a wide range of new equipment that will be purchased through billions of dollars in increased defense spending. Now, all those so-called investments will push the deficit way up, meaning the cost of servicing the interest on the debt will also go way up. Canada's debt stands at about $1.28 trillion and climbing. Will the PM personally benefit from those investments? Well, that's a loaded question. His substantial holdings of Brookfield stock options almost guarantees it, depending on which corporate entities get a slice of those government investments. Duff Conacher has some concerns, and he's going to answer the question, what guarantees do Canadians have that the decisions made by our government are in the best interest of taxpayers and not the prime minister? That's coming up shortly. Well, Canadians still have no answer as to whether the federal government got a jobs guarantee from Stellantis before the Liberals committed to giving that company $15 billion. I mean, earlier this month, the company announced it is shifting production of the Jeep Compass from its Brampton, Ontario plant to a facility in Illinois. 3,000 jobs are affected by the move. Asked repeatedly if the government secured a guarantee from Stellantis before it handed over the money, Industry Minister Melanie Joly deflected.
You should be able to tell us if there is a jobs guarantee for the 3,000 jobs in Brampton.
I think you're falling into the trap of trying to find a problem where there's none.
Well, the problem is that 3,000 people were laid off,
the government
and your government committed millions and billions, in fact, of dollars.
Well, MP Dencho, I don't know whether you want this to be a monologue or you want me to appear. Because
the question
if you
I'm
want
asking
this
you
to
is
be a
very
monologue,
clear.
I don't need to be here.
Joly did say that her government is looking to recover tax dollars given to the company that was supposed to use to grow production in Canada. Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew took a shot at the Supreme Court ruling last week that a one-year mandatory sentence for those convicted of possessing child pornography is unconstitutional. Let's listen.
Child sexual abuse images and video, this is like one of the worst things that anyone can do. Not only should go to prison for a long time, they should bury you under the prison. You shouldn't get protective custody. They should put you into general population, if you know what I mean. Skinners, this is the worst. I know my friend Doug Ford has spoken out against this. I know Premier Smith, the federal leader of the opposition, Pierre Poilievre, have all made comments on this. And I think I'm on the same page as they are. I think the average person out there hears an announcement like this and just kind of shakes their head.
Well, the Supreme Court's 5-4 ruling found that a one-year mandatory sentence infringes on the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which prohibits cruel and unusual treatment or punishment. Ontario Premier Doug Ford contradicted the Prime Minister on the matter of the controversial anti-tariff ads. Carney said he expressed reservations before those ads were released to the public, but Ford says it didn't happen that way.
Prime Minister says he had to apologize, and he said that he asked you specifically not to run the commercial.
Well, again, I'm not going to go back and forth. I had a different recollection of our conversation, but that's, people don't need that. They want to move forward.
Are you able to share your recollection, Premier? What's your
recollection? I'm just not going to go down that avenue. I'm not jumping into that bear trap. We have a great relationship. I'll tell you one thing, what he did do, he called me from Asia a couple times and said, pull the ad. And I said I wasn't going to do it until we're going to pause the ad on Monday, and that's exactly what we did.
What was the Prime Minister's tone when he asked you a couple of times to pull the ad? Was he personally angry with your actions?
No, he wasn't angry at all.
Do you think he should have apologized, or are you upset that he apologized?
Well, that's up to the Prime Minister. I'll tell you what I would do. I'd never apologize to Donald Trump.
The Prime Minister apologized to President Trump for the ads, but Ford says, as you heard him, it was the right thing to do. And Duff Conacher is with Democracy Watch. He says the current ethics rules in Canada were never intended to deal with a very wealthy prime minister so heavily invested in a company like Brookfield. Duff, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so here we have now an announcement, a budget line that is worth $50 billion, an allocation of just a huge amount of money towards infrastructure or the construction of capital projects. So we're talking about transportation projects, we're talking about hospitals, um, all sorts of innovation involved in that. What guarantees do we have with a guy like Prime Minister Carney, who's heavily invested in Brookfield, that that money isn't shifted to that particular company with an aim towards further enriching our prime minister?
We don't have any guarantees. We have a loophole-filled, sad joke of a law. It's called the Conflict of Interest Act, and it doesn't prevent, prohibit, or penalize conflicts of interest. It's truly Orwellian. And as a result, Mark Carney and every other cabinet minister is allowed to have secret investments. In the case of Carney, we know that he has stock options in Brookfield, at least until 2033, and that creates a conflict of interest for about 100 companies within the Brookfield conglomerate. And he is allowed to secretly participate in decisions that further the interests of Brookfield, which furthers his interests in terms of those stock options going up in value. And as a result, he's allowed to secretly profit from his own policies and decisions as prime minister.
So you take no comfort on the fact that it's in a blind trust?
No, the blind trust is a sham facade. It was recommended by two inquiries into conflict of interest, the Star Sharp report back in the mid-'80s, and then the Justice Parker Commission back in '87. Both recommended that blind trusts be prohibited, because you know what you put into the trust. You're allowed to choose your own trustee, and you're allowed to give them instructions such as don't sell anything, which means you'll continue to know what's in the trust. And with Brookfield and the prime minister in particular, he owns stock options in Brookfield. And it's been confirmed that those stock options cannot be what's called exercised, sold by him until 2033, 2034. And so he's not blind to the fact that he owns shares in the Brookfield conglomerate. And as well, trustees rarely, according to our own federal ethics commissioner, who's a real lapdog on this and is trying to facilitate the prime minister and other cabinet ministers actually having investments and conflicts of interest instead of preventing them. Our own ethics commissioner said trustees rarely do anything with the portfolio they're handed by a politician because they don't want to lose money for the politician. And the politician's actually allowed to get updates from the trustee as to the value of the trust, regular updates. So it's not a blind trust at all. It's a total sham. And the whole law is just a sad joke. It doesn't prevent, prohibit, or penalize conflicts of interest and allows cabinet ministers and top government officials to profit secretly from their own decisions.
Isn't he supposed to be out of the room when those types of decisions are made? I can recall from my days at the CRTC that if there's any suggestion that you might have a personal stake in any of the proceedings, that people would have to leave the meeting as you just don't participate. I mean, doesn't that provide Canadian taxpayers with some protection?
I wish that was true, but it's not true because there's a gigantic loophole in the law that it really should be called the almost impossible to be in a conflict of interest act because of this loophole. What the loophole says is you can't have a private interest, so there's no conflict of interest possible when you're dealing with a matter that applies generally or that applies to a broad class, a broad group of people or entities, businesses, other types of organizations. Well, 99% of the decisions that prime ministers, cabinet ministers, and top government officials make apply generally, like a budget. He's creating a fund. And Brookfield and dozens of other companies will be able to apply to that fund. If he does a tax credit, the tax credits apply to a whole industry, and so it applies generally. All laws apply generally. There's no Royal Bank Act. There's a Bank Act that applies to all banks. And so pretty much every time that you're making a decision as a cabinet minister. It's something that applies generally. So he's allowed to sit at the table, even though he has a direct financial interest in the outcome of the decision and could profit from it. And what's worse is the law says he's supposed to declare that publicly every time that there is a conflict, and he's supposed to step aside. But the past ethics commissioner created these things called ethics screens. And what they are is really a smoke screen, because he states once that I will not participate in decisions that affect Brookfield and the other, he's invested in 550 other companies, except I will take part in decisions that apply generally or apply to a broad group of people, again, exploiting the loophole. And he just declares that once. And then after that, what he actually does is kept a secret. So these screens actually violate the requirement in the law to declare publicly when you have a conflict. And that's why the whole system is just set up to hide and allow cabinet ministers and top officials to secretly profit from their decisions. And he will be at the table 99% of the time. The only time that he would have to step aside is if he handed a contract to Brookfield. He wouldn't be able to take part in that, because that would be a specific decision that only benefits Brookfield. But every other decision applies generally, and he's allowed to be there.
Yeah, I mean, his very presence as prime minister was probably going to affect the stock price, the value, because of course he's in a position to allocate billions of dollars to that company. And
Yeah,
so,
he's essentially and not only an inside lobbyist for the company because he's invested in it, but he's also the decision maker. So he's lobbying himself, has a conflict of interest, direct financial conflict of interest. And he may say, oh, it's not going to affect me, but really, your investments for your retirement don't affect how you make decisions? Of course it does. He's not human if he says that, because every study that's been done worldwide shows that financial conflicts of interest are the most serious ones that create the greatest conflict within someone's mind about what decision they should make. And so, again, it's just a sham facade, a sad joke, and it's going to allow him to secretly profit from his decisions. And it's really, really bad situation, and we need the law changed. And thankfully, a House committee is reviewing the law now, and it looks like Conservative MPs and Bloc MPs are going to recommend closing at least some of these loopholes, which would be an improvement, and hopefully they'll pass them through the House if the government refuses to make those changes.
yeah, he should have been forced to divest himself in all those investments. I mean, that's
which was
one way to do
recommended
that. You
by
sell off, you collapse your funds, your investments with Brookfield, and then there's no question you've got cash. I mean, you're certainly welcome to put it into, a stock, like a stock portfolio of some kind, where you've got all sorts of investments in that. But where you've got so much of this guy's personal wealth invested in one company, and that company stands to gain huge as a result of its association with the government of Canada, that just stinks to high heaven. And
Yeah, and in 1987, the Parker Commission recommended selling. Now, if you had a family farm or a family business, you don't force your family to sell just because you become a politician. What would happen then is you would just have to step aside every time there was anything that directly or indirectly affected your family business. But otherwise, sell it all. Invest in GICs, government bonds. They don't cause conflicts of interest, and you'll get a nice rate of return while you're serving the public. As long as you're invested in the stock market, you're serving yourself. And it's amazing that he is so really just his attitude is, I'm fine. Everyone should just trust me. And he's created a horrible situation for himself, because literally every time he makes a decision that affects any business sector in Canada, he's very likely in a financial conflict of interest, which means the opposition parties can raise it every time. Did you make this decision to profit yourself or to do something in the public interest? And it's going to haunt him. And but it just shouldn't be allowed. And that's hopefully the law is going to be changed by opposition MPs who have a majority in the House. If the Liberals refuse to change the law, it's being reviewed, as I mentioned, by a House committee right now.
Yeah, he bristles when he's asked about it. Now, he really doesn't want to go there. Well, too bad for him, because
Yeah.
didn't he meet with officials from Brookfield shortly after he became prime minister? I heard that. Do you know
Yes.
if that's true?
Well, it was confirmed by the registration of Brookfield that there was lobbying of Carney after it, and we don't have full disclosure of who ministers communicate with. Trudeau broke a promise that he made in 2015 to require minister's office to be subject to the Access to Information Act, which would have brought out some of those details. But the lobbyists do have to disclose some of their communications, and that has been confirmed. And it's not surprising at all. I mean, Brookfield is in multiple industries in Canada, and that's why I say Carney is very likely in a financial conflict of interest, can profit from his decisions whenever he makes a decision that affects any business sector in Canada. And also international, making decisions about trade and things like that as well, because he's invested in a lot of companies that are multinationals from other countries as well.
Yeah, I mean, even in the housing sector, for instance, where Brookfield is a major investor, I believe owner of a manufactured home company. If you're putting in billions of dollars in the manufacture of homes, you want to roll these things out. I mean, Brookfield is going to be a beneficiary of that, and through that alone. I mean,
That's
so
right.
is
We've
Carney.
We've asked the federal cabinet office, okay, you have this ethics screen, and the ethics commissioner is allowing you to hide whether you're actually stepping aside from any decisions. Okay, so you do have to disclose to us the numbers, though. How many times has that screen been activated to say to Carney, you can't go to that meeting, you can't participate in that discussion or that decision or vote? And we requested that for his initial screen, because he initially had a screen when he was prime minister before the election and running up until mid-July. And then he had a second screen put in place by the ethics commissioner. He never disclosed what the first screen said, actually, and prevented him from doing. So we've asked for that, and we've asked for the number of times he's been prevented from participating in a discussion, decision, or vote, and also who's administering the screen, and those kind of details. And what came back, these are simple numbers, right? They should know them. If they're actually using the screen, they would know how many times they've done it. And that's all we've asked for is the number, not all the details, but just the number. And they said, oh, we're going to give ourselves an extension. They were supposed to disclose it by the end of September, and they're not going to disclose it now till January. And I'll expect more delay in January, because he doesn't want this to come out. What it's going to show is he's at the table all the time. He's maybe stepped aside once or twice. And that means he's there. Every time there's a decision that affects Brookfield and the 550 other companies he's invested in, he's there at the table, making decisions where he can secretly profit from the decision.
Yeah.
So we're going to keep on digging and get it out. They can delay, they can run and hide, but the information has to be disclosed under the Federal Access to Information Act. There's no excuse for it. They're making excuses now that are illegal. They're actually violating the act right now. But as I say, they can run and hide, but we're going to keep digging and we're going to get that information out.
Yeah. And in the meantime, Mark Carney stands to become even richer than he is. I mean, I can see that.
Again, crazy, because according to reports, people added up what his investments are likely worth, $10 million. Could have invested it in a GIC, government bonds, got, set 3-5% interest rate while he was prime minister. That would have made him a significant amount of money through that time period. And then when he goes back out, starts serving himself again. Instead, he's trying to serve himself and while claiming to serve the public. And it just doesn't wash. He's a walking, talking conflict of interest.
Now, you also want to talk about the federal government's weak and vague proposed measures on bank account fraud and financial crime. Talk a little bit about that.
Yes, so budget bills should stick to just budget matters, spending, but they often throw in other measures. And one of them that's going to be in there are changes to the Federal Bank Act to finally do something the Liberals promised in 2021 about this rampant problem of bank account fraud. And Canadians, the estimate last year, lost more than $640 million to fraud. A lot of people being fooled by spoof websites, spoof phone calls, people pretending to call from the CRA or from their bank and asking them to move money out into certain accounts. $640 million. This has been a problem that's been well documented for almost a decade. Liberals made promises in 2021, didn't do anything. And now here we are in 2025, and the finance minister, Francois-Philippe Champagne, announced on October 20th these really weak, vague measures, far, far weaker than what's been done in Australia and in England. And what's been done in those countries is they've said if a bank or a telecom company that's hosting a spoof website or allowing spoof phone calls over their lines, if they can't prove they did their due diligence to protect financial consumers, then they have to repay them the amount of money that they lost. And reversing the whole onus and making the banks and telecom and internet companies prove that they've actually protected people. Because they set up this whole online system. And if they didn't put in the safeguards and the guardrails, then they're the ones at fault for people getting fooled by spoof websites and spoof phone calls. So what unfortunately the federal Liberals promised was just a rehash of the hot air promises they made in 2021. Really weak, vague measures. They're saying banks are going to have procedures in place to protect customers. Well, in 2018, they put a provision in the bill that said banks have to have procedures in place to protect customers. And unfortunately, we have this lapdog agency called the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada that just doesn't enforce those requirements effectively at all. Far weaker than the consumer watchdog groups in the US and the UK, and almost never goes after the big banks. And so, of course, they don't have procedures in place because they know that's not required. They're not, even if they're caught, they're not going to get fined or prosecuted. And that's all they're proposing again now is for anti-fraud that you have to have procedures in place. And that's not going to change anything if the banks aren't required to have those procedures in place and also required to pay customers if they're the ones, the banks or the telecom or internet companies are the ones that are really at fault for someone getting fooled and losing all their life savings.
Duff, Conacher, Democracy Watch. How do people support your organization?
DemocracyWatch.ca, they can see all the campaigns for government ethics, strengthening those standards as we talked about, and also some key bank accountability measures to protect people from gouging, fraud, and abuse by our big banks.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. Appreciate it.
Thanks. We'll be interested to see what's in the budget bill and happy to talk again about the details when they come out.
Absolutely. Thank you, Duff. And that is it for this edition of Straight Up. Appreciate you tuning in, my friends. Let's do it again real soon, shall we? Bye-bye for now.